Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. My name is Ellie Gold. For those who don't know me, the president of the Gold Institute for International Strategy. I would encourage everybody to visit the goldiis.org, our website, to learn more about the Institute, to see how you can support the Institute and the work of all of our fellows, including our guest today, Larry Cunningham. The events of yesterday is historic. Unfortunately, it's not unprecedented. However, it is something that it takes the issues of the day and the issues of the election to a whole new level. I have been, over the past 12 hours, received phone calls from 4 different countries, from people within government who are concerned about what this means for the upcoming election, what this means for the United States, what this means for the relationship that the United States has with these countries, or from their perspective, their countries have with the United States. This has much larger ramifications, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. The Gold Institute has 3 law enforcement fellows from various different backgrounds. Larry Cunningham is a Gold Institute senior law enforcement fellow who has extensive Secret Service experience, to which I'm going to ask Larry to provide his a bit of a background of his own. But I will say that Larry has worked on protective details of sorts for 6 presidents, including a pope and Gorbachev and others. So he has an extensive background as to what has happened yesterday. I suspect that Larry has as many questions as we do, but also it has the unique ability to put things in perspective. I'm not going to discuss what happened yesterday. I'm going to leave that for Larry, so without further ado, let me hand this over to Larry. One more point is Larry's going to speak for about 25 to 30 minutes. Following his remarks, we will have the opportunity to ask questions, and for each one of us to get greater detail or perspective on things. I don't believe for a moment, after spending a great deal of time with Larry this morning, that Larry can explain what happened and any better than the next guy can explain, what this means. But what I'm looking for from Larry, and I think what we should all be looking for from Larry, is a perspective as to the questions that should be asked, the questions that are frivolous and don't necessarily need to be asked, and maybe what went wrong, at least from this early stage. So, Larry, floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ellie. And on behalf of the Gold Foundation, I'm honored to be here to offer some insight into the tragedy and epic attack we have experienced yesterday. Just briefly, I wanted to add just a bit to my resume. Since my retirement from the Secret Service in 1994, I've been an active consultant, and some of my clients have included the United Arab Emirates royal family and their security forces, as well as the Saudi Arabian Officer Corps. I've also completed work on behalf of the American Battle Monuments Commission to coordinate all the security for the World War II Memorial. I've had other clients whom I've applied similar protocols and similar rationale for protection, to include Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jordan, NASCAR, Harvard, and a variety of other notable organizations. That aside, here we find ourselves in yet another conundrum and a tragedy that's very difficult to explain. But I'll make the effort to do that. Right off the bat, I can tell you what we do know. We know that this was a 20-year-old individual from Pennsylvania who we don't know what his motivation was per se. We're still investigating it. but reports are, as of an hour ago, they did find some bomb-making materials at his residence in Pennsylvania. The investigation is ongoing. So that is where we are right now. It would be difficult to speculate further. And along the lines of speculation, before we begin some of the areas I'm going to address, we will be having questions in about 30 minutes. I'll do my best to answer. But prior to all this, what I would offer, and I would caution all of us, is to try to stay focused on the facts that we know right now. We're tempted as people in this kind of heightened political environment, especially this particular one in history, to come to conclusions about theories and conspiracies and so forth. That's a natural thing to do. But I think we need to take a deep breath, bring down the temperature, and try to look at what we do know. If we get bogged down or enveloped and swept into these theories, however erratic they may be, we may lose some of our objectivity in the process and fail to see some of the facts. So that's my caution from experience. I know we have a lot of smart people listening to this. I happen to have had the opportunity to have insights into how these things work, and I'll offer you some of those. As an additional note, before I get into it, I can tell you I've done numerous lead and site advances for President Reagan, but I've also done them for Clinton and also other dignitaries along the line. Lead responsibility includes all the entities impacting protection. I've also was assigned in my career lead responsibilities for the Pope, as Ellie mentioned, and Gorbachev and many others. The key on this is that none of these things happen in a vacuum. They happen with a lot of interaction and liaison with police, fire, emergency responders, and the public to make these things work. No man's an island, and this certainly is no exception. Now, to get into this a little bit further, political violence in our country, as you've probably heard, is not new to our country. It's a tragic thing that happens. People lose their objectivity and they go too far in one direction or the other. But we can look back to Andrew Jackson, where he fended off an attack many years ago on the steps of the Capitol. Certainly Kennedy in 1963, Reagan 1981, and many others. I can tell you that looking at those different issues, the one in Kennedy's case, involved some heightened political rhetoric. I recall there was some reports that apparently there were posters about Kennedy saying wanted dead or alive circulating in Dallas. In Reagan's case, Hinckley, who was, from what we can tell, a lone shooter, had some upside down connection with trying to impress Jodie Foster with attacking President Reagan. And then, of course, we have yesterday's attack. And there's been many others in political history. But I want to focus on yesterday's because I have to say that I've never seen in my life, or what I've read, such political discourse that is so competing and frankly so inflammatory. And I think that particular element has contributed to this to some degree. We don't have any information on whether or not this is an organized attack or whether this particular person, Matthew Crooks, was radicalized or if he was encouraged to do this. We don't have any of that information, so we have to stay away from it until we get that. But what I can tell you is that presidential protection, particularly President of the United States and other dignitaries in the world, it's complicated. It's multifactored, and it is evolving. Every time there's an attack, whether overseas or in the United States, professionals like the Secret Service look at these things and take notes from it and try to improve their particular protocols and their philosophy and their strategies. We did this when I was on the detail. Prior to me being on the White House detail, I was in our training academy doing just that, developing a variety of elements that would enhance our protection. For example, we created the fourth shift, meaning there are 3 shifts that protect the president. The fourth shift basically was a cadre of agents that were not working, that were assigned to do training. In my era, that was a mandatory component of being a member of the White House detail. I'm not sure in this era if that's being done right now to the degree that we recommended because of being overwhelmed with other details. The service is strapped very thin right now. I'm not sure that or the PT test, which I also created, is being adhered to with the same level of adherence. In fact, I know they have not, based on my contacts in that arena. But anyway, getting back to protection, it is multifactored. You probably heard in the past rings of protection. They're not necessarily perfect concentric rings. It's a lot of elements. It's intelligence, what's happening in the world, what's happening that may impact the safety and security of the president and his family. What about training? What kinds of trainings are being conducted, which is mandatory and which are not? And how do they address the evolving threat? That's the magic. Is our training addressing the threats that exist now? Or is it old? Or is it too obtuse or too esoteric that it doesn't really address the immediate threats? That's another element. Also, strategy. How do we take all this into account and develop a viable presidential protective security protocol? What are the tactics? How do we implement them? How do they evolve, or are they different from a permanent detail like the White House detail with President Biden? Are they different in a very fluid campaign setting? Those are the kinds of things that are addressed continually. And yes, there is a difference between a permanent protective detail of the White House and one that's traveling many stops a day. The service does its best to do that kind of thing. However, there are times when there are some missteps. So I just want to make that point very clear. One other key element before I get into some of the things that occurred, a key element to the success of protection is rapport with the principal. In my era, I dealt with many protectees, 7 presidents actually, even remotely as I was retired, but directly 6 and 1 additional after I was retired. And I can tell you that rapport with the principal is huge. It's very, very important because there has to be a trust, much like a husband and wife or a very good friend, a good comrade. You have to be able to trust what they do and what you do, how we work together, and trusting instincts. Without that type of bond, the security is more compromised. I can tell you from my observations that the current administration has a reasonably good rapport with their protectors, but I can see that with the Trump protective detail, that the agents do have a good rapport with them, and historically that's been true with former President Trump, and it continues today. Now, what happened? What do we know? Well, an event like the rally in Butler involves a couple of things. As soon as the notice is sent out that this is going to be a hard stop, it's going to be a rally, agents on the advance team, an advance team of agents, are dispatched to that location, and they meet with the local police. They meet with the staff, the political campaign staff. They also meet with other responders, medical. They do surveys at hospitals. They conduct routes, primary, secondary, and tertiary. They evaluate the capability, the response capability, and the resources that the police have. That would include Butler Police Department, the state police, other entities that may be involved in securing that for the protection of the presidential campaign visit. Another key element is there's a lot of staff, folks, the host of that particular area. How are all those things being coordinated? What kinds of meetings are being had? Importantly, are there interoperable communications? Are the meetings being held where the same information is being given to all the entities so that there's no disconnects? In other words, are we all on the same sheet of music? So those kinds of things I would trust happen and happened before yesterday's rally. Now, in terms of the response, The elements that are involved in this, from my knowledge, strictly speaking, on a presidential protective visit in terms of elements of the Secret Service, we have the advance team. Also, we have advance agents, but we also have, for the motorcade, a motorcade agent, and that person is responsible for the routes, primary, secondary, tertiary, and importantly, routes to areas where they can hide and seek refuge and routes to the hospital. Now, it's important to note that all these forces and all these elements meet on a regular basis a couple times a day to make sure they're all in the same sheet of music. Okay. In the motorcade, there's such a thing called the counter assault team. And their job in life is en route from an airport to a rally, airport to a site. Their job is to make sure that there's nothing untoward along the route. There's pilot cars, there's helicopters, and usually there's drones. I didn't see any drones in this case. We'll get to that in a minute. But the counter assault team element is to leave the motorcade if there's a problem or a threat, to neutralize that threat, to allow the motorcade to continue to the site pretty much unscathed. Now, when you get to the actual site itself, there are usually agents pre-posted to secure areas that have been swept, meaning check for weapons, check for bombs, check for dangerous devices. Our technical security division and other elements, bomb squad, for example, check these areas. When they are swept, meaning organized and deemed clean and safe, agents and police officers are posted those key areas to make sure the sanctity of those areas, the safety of those areas are maintained prior to the president's visit. Now, what else is involved? Well, there are agents that go around prior to the visit to make sure the integrity of the security is maintained. Adjustments may be made. If there's a gap that wasn't noted before, a hole in the fence, or a problem with the gate, whatever the case, they make sure the access and screening of those coming in are consistent. The Uniform Division handles that with oftentimes magnetometers, dogs, and other devices to make sure nothing dangerous is allowed into the inner, or shall I say, the secure perimeter. Now, key on everybody's mind right now is, what about the counter sniper team? Remember I mentioned the counter assault team. Well, now we're talking about the counter sniper team. Counter assault teams in the motorcade, counter snipers are actually on rooftops. I'm very familiar with them, having done lead advances in the past. They are very professional. In my era, I can't speak to what happened yesterday, but in my era, and even more recently, even a few years ago, I can tell you they were very professional. I'm not saying they're not professional now. I'm just giving you the facts. So their job in life is to go to a site and look at all the particular vantage points of access and eyeball to that site. In this case, it was the dais where former President Trump was speaking. So their job in life is to survey these. They go to the buildings, they go to the hilltop, they go to the trees and other areas that might offer a vantage point for a shooter to do harm. Normally, they do all that. They do trajectories and they figure out the most optimum vantage point for the counter snipers. What they do then is they produce a very comprehensive report with all the angles, the distances, the vantage points. It's quite scientific. And the lead advance agent and others are looking at this as part of the entire protective bubble to see, does it make sense? Is it comprehensive? And usually, in my experience, it usually very much is. So that's another element in the security plan. Another key element is access, but also importantly, egress. Can we get out of here if something's wrong? Usually, you want to control 180 degrees, 90 at the minimum. You have to have a protected exit. Apparently, they did have that. So the question has come up here. What about the response yesterday in Butler, Pennsylvania? How did the Secret Service perform? I'm giving you this based on what I know, what I've observed. I could certainly be given new information that might change my mind. But from what I know right now, I can tell you the immediate response of the inner perimeter, the details assigned, to Trump was good. It was quick, it was pretty comprehensive, and it was very complete. They covered him in that difficult environment quite well. When it was deemed safe, the determination was made to evacuate. Now, question in everybody's mind, what about the counter snipers? There were reports from spectators that they saw a person climbing up a building in the Agri Center outside the perimeter, but literally less than 200 yards away, which there are reports it was 152 feet, 200 feet. At any rate, it was quite close, even though it was outside the defined spectator arena. There are reports that this person was seen climbing up to this rooftop with a long rifle weapon and was placing himself with a vantage point in the direction of Trump. How in the world could this happen? I can tell you, based on what I know with how the counter sniper team conducts itself, I find it very difficult, frankly, to understand how this could possibly happen, that a member of the public, a spectator, an attendee, could notice this and reportedly, I haven't seen the reports yet, but reportedly told a police officer that they saw a person on a roof with a weapon. How that was transmitted, how that was relayed to the command post, I don't know. I would assume that they had interoperable communications. Was it not taken seriously? I don't have the answer to that, but I can tell you under normal circumstances, that actually should have been noted very quickly by the counter sniper team. There were two teams based on reports and what I've seen, which means you have 4 sets of eyes, 2 separate teams positioned to look at potential problem areas from a vantage point. In other words, when they did their advance, did they look at all potential vantage points where a shooter or someone intending to cause harm could have a good view? The whole purpose of the counter sniper team would be to take all that into account, post themselves so they would have the bird's eye view to be able to take all this in, surveil it proactively, and deal with it. In my era, I can tell you that the counter sniper team would be able to function autonomously, meaning if they deemed that there was a threat, a person with a weapon, the 2-man team would make that determination independent of getting approval from a higher up. If there was an immediate threat, it's their purview and their mandate and their training to take that person out or neutralize that threat. It did not appear that that had happened. So the question is, how was that advance conducted? What parameters were they looking at? Were they distracted? Why in the world could you get as many as 8 rounds off before you neutralize a direct threat to a protectee? These questions are confounding me right now as well. But I can tell you those are the parameters that exist in my era and pretty much today. Now I can tell you the technology is even better. They have much better equipment. They have much better surveillance capabilities. In terms of how they do the perimeters, I would, based on what I've interacted with them more recently, I was just in Normandy, France, actually, visiting there for the 80th anniversary, and I interacted with the Secret Service. It appeared that they had a pretty comprehensive, large perimeter. So the questions I have are very similar to yours. Now, I can tell you there have been reports. I haven't verified them yet. I will. But there are reports now that apparently some materials, some resources have been withheld for whatever reason for various campaign stops. These are things that are going to be discovered tomorrow. Comer and Jordan on the committees are actually bringing in DHS, the Secret Service, and the FBI, and these very pointed questions, very similar to what I'm going over right now, will be asked and queried. And I would offer they will definitely laser focus on the role of the counter sniper teams. That seems to be the huge Achilles heel here. Basically, when you look at this, it's no different than any of us that have been in the military or have done any type of security in their lives. The basic idea is you want to basically create as much distance between your vulnerable target and the threat. It's basic physics. And in this case, given the fact that the counter sniper teams qualify once a month and their qualification is deemed and predicated on the ability to shoot at 1,000 yards. They're the best in the business. I've been trained by them in my life. So why they couldn't address a threat 200 yards or less is something I can't answer right now. But I can tell you it's very disturbing. It's very concerning. The inner perimeter did well, but we're only as strong as our weakest link. And certainly that's a key link that apparently broke at that moment. But I will reserve my final judgment until I see more reports and more reporting. But I'm giving you the setup from my perspective, a bird's eye view of what an advanced agent would be going through when they go to a site and they begin to prepare security with the concentric rings of protection. Now, I'm not privy to the intelligence at that moment yesterday. I don't know if there were threats. I don't know if there had been a heightened threat level or lower threat level. Based on what I'm hearing in general, Trump has an extremely high threat level. So what determinations and what algorithms were made to determine how wide the outer, middle, and inner perimeter would be structured is something I don't know. But I can tell you, based on history, when you have a severe threat, you want to increase the access of that threat to your protectee by distance, video, drones, for example, which apparently there's a question that there were not drones, and other resources to make sure that these things are, if they're not accounted for at the front end proactively, how can they be addressed if they happen to come up in the midst of a visit? So that's pretty much what we know. I can give you one other insight here, just a few more minutes, about how this works psychologically too. We incorporate lots of things to make protectees safe. And one of the training elements is we incorporate physiology. And what I mean by that, the fight or flight response. You know that if you're threatened or something happens to you, you are preparing, your body prepares almost instinctively to either fight or run. It's one of these protective mechanisms that we still have in our physiology. Well, when you look at the protective setup, the outer perimeter folks are basically geared to engage. They're geared to fight. So when there's a shooting or a threat, an explosion, whatever, their instinct and their training capitalizes on that instinct to fight. The inner perimeter, when there's a threat, and the inner perimeter agents did this, their instincts are to run. And that makes sense. That fits the physiology. You saw weapons drawn and so forth. It's probably okay, but frankly, you have to be cautious when you bring out weapons in a inner perimeter, because what you're doing is you may be drawing gunfire into that vulnerable arena, vulnerable perimeter, inner perimeter. So technically, you want the fight to go on in the outer perimeter elements, and you want the running and the protection and the fleeing to happen on the inner perimeter. And so that's what a lot of the training is based on, or should be based on. Now, where do we go from here? Well, I would offer again, as I said in the beginning, we want to avoid conspiracy theories. I'm also a premises liability expert, and I pride myself in being an open-minded person. And I would say that there are some things that could occur, some things that could be uncovered in the investigation that we're not privy to right now. So rather than get all breathless and start feeding into theories that, gee, Biden probably did this, or maybe the government did this, or my God, people hate him, and there's a whole conspiracy of folks out there on the fringes that planned this. We have to stay away from that. What we need to do is look at what we have, let the investigation continue. The Congress and the Senate are going to be looking at this very carefully, and we're going to have hearings, and we're going to find out maybe elements that we're not aware of at the moment. But what I'm giving you is the sum and substance of, candidly, 50 years of this type of thing. So that's where we are. I think at this moment, we've gone about 30 minutes. I would invite questions and I'll do the best I
Okay,
can.
Larry, thank you very much for your comments, and I think it's quite insightful to know exactly what we're looking at with regards to how the Secret Service prepares for this. Um, I know we have Martin Johnson on this meeting. I think if you're still here, Martin, I'm going to ask you to maybe jump in here for a minute if I can. But Larry, I just want to ask this one question, which I'm going to run the risk of doing what you asked all of us not to do.
Okay.
Um, we look at what happened yesterday, and by some other events, over the past year across the globe, people have obvious questions to ask. Um, but based on what you know from how the Secret Service works, from the agent all the way on, um, to me it would look as though inadequate resources versus incompetence of the advanced detail to allow such a whole. Is that is that a fair speculation, or
Uh,
is that something, or am I off on that?
I think you're quite correct. You've zeroed in on many comments I've heard from other colleagues over the years, and I'm sure I'm going to hear them again. Case in point, you recall some of the missteps and some of the, candidly, the misbehavior of some elements of the service. All agencies have it. We're not unique that way. But the late Lieberman put together a committee to look into the service, its culture, its character, its protocols deeply. And many of the conclusions hit exactly what you're talking about, Ellie. Namely, um, the agency is very small and it has an enormous mission. It's expanded over the years to include some very complicated access device cases. In this technical era, the savvy cyber criminal is quite an obstacle and quite an adversary. So that stuff is being added to the plate. Protection has been added to the plate to the point where many details, smaller details, they're still resource dependent, have been formulated to address threats to various members on the Hill and other members in government. Well, that drains resources significantly. Also, and this is public record, many agents over the past administrations, last two at least, have been drained in terms of hours. After they get finished a protective detail, like a candidate detail or their stint, and then they get back and try to go to the office and catch up on paperwork, whatever, then they're sent out to do other protective details. There's been reports, and they're public record, where they've been working beyond unimaginable hours, 100 hours a week, sometimes more, just incredible hours. So this diminishes your response, this diminishes your energy and so forth. Other elements that the Lieberman group found and has been validated since, to Ellie's point, is that at the time of the problems in Cartagena and some of the other behaviors that were concerning at that point, it was found that many senior agents, a little bit after me, I retired in 94, were up for retirement. So there was a big void in leadership. And that void created openings for younger agents that may or may not have been adequately prepared to fulfill those roles. So this created an issue. Also, financial resources were not commensurate and did not keep pace with the demands of security in this era, in the last 10-year era. So those elements, while they're not an excuse per se, they are impacting the quality of protection in some arenas. And that was the assessment of Lieberman's report with others. And I can see how, having been on details, we work 16 hours a day. I've worked many, many times when I was up 24 hours. It's the nature of the beast. Sometimes you have to do it. And so obviously that is going to create a little bit of a deficit in terms of your energy and maybe your focus. So those are some possible reasons for what we're facing right now. So does that answer it,
Thank you.
Ellie?
Yes, absolutely. It appears to me that this is an issue top down, not bottom up. But Martin, let me just jump to you
Correct.
real quick. I know I did not prep Martin, so forgive me. But if you can give maybe a brief comment, it appears to me that there was limited interoperability with regards to local law enforcement and Secret Service. Just for identification purposes, Martin Johnson is a Gold Institute senior law enforcement fellow who works and trains local law enforcement across the country. So, Martin, do you have any thoughts on this before we move to questions?
Yeah, I do, and feel free to cut me off if I go on too long. I have a lot
I
of
will. Don't worry.
uh,
Yeah.
just for introduction, Martin Johnson, retired Howard County, Maryland Police Department, 40 years in law enforcement, 25 doing it, 15 teaching it nationwide. And I was, as far as this type of incident goes, I was number one, I was part of an executive protection team for a number of my years, not all 25, for state and local dignitaries. But also, I was assigned temporarily for a period of time to work with the First Lady's detail when Mrs. Barbara Bush was coming to our county. So my police chief pointed at me and said, "You work with the Secret Service, coordinate everything, give them whatever they want, make sure everything goes well." Okay, fine. So I do have a little bit of experience just planning and doing some of the things that Larry talked about pre-planning and arranging for security devices and people and things like that. The slow response, if in fact, and folks, this is less than 24 hours old, we might find out that news was completely fictitious. We could find out a lot of things. 2 weeks from now, this may look completely different to us. At the moment, psychologically, if there were to have been a slow response to citizens seeing something and saying something, which we all know, we all know that phrase now. Two things. First is that I think the average person thinks of such an activity as a non-uniformed man climbing onto the roof with a rifle is unthinkable. How can this possibly happen? Am I really seeing what I'm seeing? The presumption that it's legitimate. I'm not saying that this should have been presumed to be legitimate. I don't know what people were thinking, but I'll give you one difference, and this is not a clue for the next person or a copycat, but had the shooter stolen or donned a uniform and been up on that roof, maybe people wouldn't have even noticed. Maybe people would have assumed that it was legitimate. So, I'm glad he was not dressed in a uniform and that there were people noticing. As far as what I've heard, what we've all seen and heard, the request, if there has been for this particular detail, for the ex-president's detail, if there has been a request for more people, agents, personnel, equipment, that can never be turned down. If your own people are asking for more people, equipment, capabilities, whatever it is, the answer has to be yes. And I don't care what the cost is. There should be no cost factor to it. It doesn't matter. If President Carter's detail asked for anything, they should get it. Is he a high value target? Not quite as much as the former president, Trump or Obama or anybody like that, anybody more current. But these things should never be turned down. Maybe they were asked for, maybe they were turned down. If they were and they were turned down, big mistake. If they were not
specifically, Martin,
sorry,
let me just say, if you could just comment, just because of in effort of time.
Yeah.
And John, I saw you put your hand up. is there, what are your thoughts specifically on the interoperability? We saw people reaching out to local law enforcement. There is this guy, as you are describing. It appears as though there was a slow, if any, engagement with Secret Service snipers on the other side of the space and so on. Any thoughts specifically on that aspect?
Yes, and I'll go back to when I was on working with the First Lady's detail. We had communication across the board. Fire department, everybody had everybody else's radios, and I was part of making sure that that's the way it was. I had the secret. I was right next to Special Agent Ron Roach, who was in charge of the detail at that time. He and I were together 90% of the time when Mrs. Bush was here. I had my county radio. He had his Secret Service radio. I had immediate communication with all my local officers, with my fire department. I could talk to anybody instantly. Ron could talk to anybody instantly. So the interoperability is paramount importance. If one of my guys, I'll just pretend back in the day, if one of my guys was told by a citizen, hey, there's a guy with a gun approaching the school where where the detail is, they would have told me. I would have been right next to Ron Roach. I would have said, Ron, one of my guys has, been told that there's somebody coming with a gun, and it would have been locked down. Of course, immediate action would have been taken. So yeah, interoperability is paramount. Everybody needs to be able to talk with everybody. And what I told my guys on foot was, you see anything with a weapon, I want you to yell gun, gun, gun into the radio, period. That's what you do. And that's the first alarm. And then everything's going to get locked down.
It appears that did not happen yet. It appears that it did not happen yesterday. And there was some sort of slow. Let me
Ellie, let me just take that real snippet right there with Martin talked about. Absolutely. I talked about the evolving protective protocols. In my area, it was arm's reach, gun, evacuate. Arm's reach, sound off gun, evacuate. And I was involved in training folks on the basis of the 2 attempts of Gerald Ford. That has evolved since then. The current thing is gun, basically evacuate. Never mind arm's reach, because that implies bringing and getting engaged in a battle in the inner perimeter. So sound off, cover, and evacuate, which is what the agents did. I didn't hear a lot of discussion or yelling about gun or evacuate. They were dealing with a protectee that wanted to do a couple of wardrobe adjustments. But at any rate, that is the way that's evolved. So sound off, basically cover and evacuate. Anyway, go ahead.
Excellent. So if anyone has any questions, they should please either raise their virtual hand or message me within the chat, and we will get to you. The first question is going to Saul Montes Bradley.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody.
And I'm just asking, Saul. I'm just asking everybody to ask their questions and quickly, so that way we can get everybody in.
Of course. Larry, you touched on a couple of things that have been bothering me since yesterday. It appeared to me that the agents surrounding Trump reacted fairly well. We can discuss whether one was faster than another, but they immediately blocked the view of Trump, covered him in something like a rugby scrum, and at one point he was exposed, and I saw a female agent cover him with her back to the origin point of the shooting. Very courageous and very admirable. If I see a problem, and I see a few, is precisely both in the planning. Why wasn't there somebody on that roof? Or if they didn't have a drone, and of course, why didn't they have drones in there? How can there be so blind, so close? And I know that at 130 yards, I can take that shot.
Right. Well, those are questions that are occurring to a lot of us. I can tell you I wasn't privy to the arrangements, but I do know absent from that were drones. And also to answer your question why someone was not on that rooftop, um, the explanation is going to come back that it's outside the perimeter. However, if that's the case, then why wasn't that building sealed off?
Right. Why wasn't in the perimeter?
Yes, the counter snipers and the advanced agents seal off any buildings that offer vantage points for that period of time. That building did not appear to be sealed off, and it wasn't, frankly, secured right. If there were perimeter officers on the outside of the immediate spectator area, why in the world didn't they see that? So in terms of putting an officer on that, that would be a call based on the agent. I was doing the advance and not because I know about this one. I would have offered to say, let's put a couple of uniforms on that roof. Let's make sure it's sealed because it certainly offers a vantage point. And then we can notify and make sure that the counter sniper preliminary survey, the counter sniper survey has accounted for that. So while there wasn't necessarily an agent on that roof, the counter sniper should have counted for that vulnerability, whether they paid more attention to it and or put a couple of uniforms on those vulnerable, apparently easily accessible building.
Let's go back. Clayton, you're up.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Clayton.
But hello. First of all, I appreciate you today for all the information you're giving us and your insights, and what has happened and what we can do in the future. My question is relative to what you've been talking about and a few other people, but I have a two-pronged question. First of all is, where do you envision, to me, it seems like the outer perimeter was way too close. There are plenty of other rifles, long guns that can shoot much further distances. And how do you envision, what do you see the extension of these perimeters in the near future? And my second question is, what is your position or what are your thoughts on protective order for R.F. Jr., being that his uncle and his father had terrible situations happen to them?
Okay, two good questions. My answer to those is that's a judgment call based on the advanced agent. I don't know what he was thinking or what his information was. I'm not privy to his intel, but I can tell you you're quite right. I talked about it in the beginning of this, that one of our best measures is geography, time and distance. The closer it is, the less time you have to react, the more vulnerable you are, and the distance makes it very dangerous. So clearly it wouldn't have been that difficult to extend that perimeter, whether it's a zone patrol officers at access points, even a quarter mile away. Absolutely. I don't know why. I'm thinking back to many of the surveys I've done in the past, both for our presidents and also heads of state. And basically, when you had consensus meetings, you would talk about this. And one of the methods that I would hope was being looked at again is to have meetings, collective meetings with all the resources, and have each representative present what they have to make sure everyone is privy to that we all know what Butler PD is doing, what the state police is doing, what the bomb squad is doing, what the post standards are doing, what EMT are doing. I didn't get that sense looking at that. So you're quite right. It's not that expensive, and it certainly is easily conducted and easily managed. And in this era of high-tech communications, it wouldn't be difficult to make sure that we all have interoperable connections and test it. Your second question. All my colleagues that have commented on LinkedIn and others are appalled, nothing short of appalled, that Robert Kennedy is not being given protection, particularly given the history of the family. I don't know the exact approval process, but I can tell you any seasoned agent, any common sense person that understands the criteria for offering protection are aghast at this. I do not understand why in the world Robert Kennedy would not be given protection, given what like Martin says, given what the odds are and the downside is, cost is immaterial. So I'm aghast at that. That's going to come out. That's going to come out tomorrow in the subsequent days of these hearings.
Let me add, just for Larry, the Secret Service protects foreign dignitaries, right? So
Yeah.
why not RFK Jr.? I'm just doing a little comparison. If Secret Service is easily assigned to some diplomat from Fredonia,
Exactly.
RFK Jr. is higher on the food chain than that person.
Well, I can tell you, there are a lot of thoughts about this, and some commentary by smart people have suggested this could be a political reason. I'm not a politician, but I can tell you
Okay,
it smells. Now, John, I think John has.
John Wallstetter. John,
Yes, I have some comments. First of all, on the shooting,
if they're John, if they're comments, just keep an eye on the time, please.
I will be very quick. The first thing is, we're lucky this guy was not a professional shooter. He sprayed 8 shots and got lucky, and almost got even luckier. A marksman at that, what is essentially point blank range for a sharpshooter, one shot would have done it, would have been dead center under perfect conditions, lighting. And the second thing, this is what Dan Bongino was quoted as saying. Of course, he's formerly with the service. I want to repeat and can absolutely confirm the USSS Director Kim Cheadle has repeatedly turned down requests for larger security footprint around President Trump, despite knowing the threat level had a third comment. I looked in the preparation for my book, Presidential Succession, to the question of providing Secret Service protection, because Donald Trump is the leading candidate. He should have had the highest level much sooner. The official line is not until he's nominated at the convention, but it was known that he had the nomination clinched back in the spring. And as for RFK Jr., same thing. And the other point on that, and this is something I found when I did the research, this is the first administration to refuse a request from a candidate for special protection ever over the last, ever since the assassination of RFK Sr. They started doing this. I mean, Richard Nixon gave it to Ted Kennedy. He hadn't even declared. Barack Obama got protection for a year or so before each of his runs. So this is unprecedented. And there was a big over what went on with the convention site at Milwaukee, where initially they left it solely to the Milwaukee police. And at that time, they had said publicly they thought the greatest security threat at the convention would be some of those attending it. And they had only about a quarter mile or something of a security perimeter, where there was 3 miles in Chicago for the Democrats.
Correct.
They pushed that back, but they fought all the way on it. There have, by the way, Larry, I'm not going to refer this, there are numerous inquiries that have been made about the Secret Service and its performance, and they really haven't done very much to remedy those things. And one of the things I recommended is we got to have the Secret Service out of the Department of Homeland Security, where they have their own budget and they can get at that $6 trillion budget. It should be much higher. There's no excuse for not meeting the standards that Larry talked about.
I'll give you one other, John. Thank you for that. Those are all documented elements. I can tell you, I'll remind you, there was an incident at the Andrews Air Force Base, which John is familiar with, and many of you probably are, where a female agent, for whatever reason, got frustrated and frankly had a mental breakdown, and she was throwing female sanitary devices and took the phone out of the supervisor's hand, hiding behind curtains, and the supervisor had to arrest her. The reason I'm bringing that up is that this particular director, upon reports, and we're going to find out more tomorrow and then the rest of the week, has apparently invoked a little bit of a DEI and woke theme to some of our protective protocols. And this is based on information received from agents who have actually filed a complaint with Congress that the protection and security protocols, training protocols, are being relaxed to some degree. This particular agent who did the attack, apparently on reports from the service, their own agents, has said that she was kind of passed through. some of the marginal scores or failing scores were overlooked. And so there's that element right now, which is very, very disturbing from my perspective, because it hurts all of us, not just the service. It hurts the protectee, hurts the public. And I'm happy to see that Comer et al. Are going to conduct hearings starting tomorrow, and they'll be addressing these very points.
I would recommend everybody to go after this call, not during this call, but after this call, go directly to Amazon and purchase John's new book that just came out, Presidential Succession, in which he spends a great deal of time talking about Secret Service and their relation to presidential details. But
Yes.
we have one more question, Mark Foley,
Ellie.
and then we will move on. Then we'll move to closing remarks. Mark, you're up.
Thanks, Ellie. Hi, Larry. Hi, good to see you again.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good, thanks. You kind of touched on what I was about to go into, but Kim Cheadle was, as far as I know, she does not have a military background. She does not have a Secret Service background. She was hired out of head of corporate security for PepsiCo. She was actually on CBS a month or so ago saying that her main mission or her main concern with the Secret Service was to get more women in and to get it up to 30% women. Yesterday, we saw 3 female Secret Service agents, about 5'5", being tasked with providing a physical wall for a 6'3" target. And when they were put him in the car, to my untrained eye, I saw 3 women whose training went out the window. All muscle memory failed. They were just kind of looking around, not knowing what to do. One of them was having trouble. In fact, was unable to holster her weapon. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are the following. When I was in our training division, by the way, I was there for 4 years prior to going to the presidential division. And at that time, we had some innovative, we thought, training. We had running man Uzi courses. We had courses that required you to think, run, have a lot of distractions. One of the benchmark courses we put everybody through was called the Attack on the Principal Exercise. And we would take a team, for example, a candidate nominee team, which Trump has. And prior to putting them out there, they would bring them together. They would be vetted, apparently, in my era. I don't know how they're being vetted now, but they would be brought together, identified as the team, as that detail. And they would be taken to Beltsville, Maryland, and they'd be run through lots of plausible scenarios, attacks during the along the motorcade route, someone from the crowd, a rope line, a speech, a visit to a building, whatever the case may be. And a lot of attack scenarios would be invoked. It would be videoed, the communication would be recorded, and there would be intensive after actions to address strengths and weaknesses. My sense is, having been involved at both ends, on the detail as a supervisor, but also as a senior trainer in our training academy, involved with the seminal development of these kinds of training protocols, I can tell you, no, there was not the type of attack on the principle go-to responses that you would see. Just take a look at the attack outside the Capitol Hilton in Trump's, in Reagan's era. I mean, it's far, far different. I didn't see a sense of urgency. And quite candidly, I'm not critiquing people per se. I'm just looking at the entire thing and some elements of a lack of PT. Like, I don't see any evidence of a modicum of my PT program, which has been approved and is still in effect, being adhered to. I mean, I look at some of my supervisors are past, but I'm thinking back, as someone listening might remember, but Robert DeProspero, he's the type of person who would, if he won the lottery, wouldn't crack a smile. And that's what you want. He was never happy. He said, look, we've got 70% of this. There's 30% we don't know. You better hope that your protocols and your training and all the arrangements you've made would be able to adapt to that 30% we don't know about. That's the kind of urgency. That's the kind of esprit de corps I don't see. Now, we may learn more, but based on yesterday, that would be unacceptable with the training and leadership I had in my era. So your point's well taken, Mark.
I want to thank everybody for joining us, but I'm going to ask Larry to provide some closing comments. Um, Larry, in your closing thoughts, can you maybe tell us? I have no doubt that every one of us is going to have the television or the internet on over the next week, and hopefully both Larry and Martin formally can join us again for another to revisit this and to give us updates as to what you see over the next week or so. But in your closing thoughts, can you please give us some things that we should look for, both tactically, professionally, and politically? What are some of the concerns that you have? You're going to look at this politically. As a Secret Service agent, you're going to look at from the top down. Where you referenced the hearings that are coming up over this very important and serious issue. Can you provide us, what should we be looking for? What should we be listening for from the head of the Secret Service, FBI, DHS on this matter? And of course, I thank you for your time today.
Okay, I think a thoughtful person in those positions, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt here. But the first thing I want to do is let's bring down the temperature. I talked about how when you get filled with emotion and ideology, and you've seen it. Let's just be honest. You've seen it out there. Some otherwise very smart people, and you would think empirically thinking people would say, wait a minute, let's look at this. But you see smart people making outlandish claims that defy the laws of physics, defy economy, and defy, just any common sense. So I would hope that any inquiry is predicated on let's take a deep breath and let's look at really what we have. Now, politically, I see that in my era, in my lifetime, I've never seen such visceral animus, and candidly, sometimes on both sides, that has basically fostered this type of rhetoric and fostered these kinds of behaviors. You can remember when Trump was running, and then during his era, people were dragged out of cars and beaten for what? That kind of thing. So I'm thinking folks in power need to take a heavy look at this, a real terribly sober look at this and say, wait a minute, we have people that are complicit, and I'm going to call out the media. Let's just be honest. You have Jake Tapper calling him Hitler. You have Kathleen Griffiths showing a decapitated head of the president. This stuff is not even imaginable. This is beyond the proof. It's beyond the pale. It's self-defeating. It's defeating for our entire nation and our whole process. So I would look for, at the political level, to some smart people and maybe otherwise sober people, and I'm not sure we have enough yet, quite candidly, to let's take a deep breath here and why are we here? We're here for the nation. We're here for the populace, and we're here for our culture that we want to preserve. So that's my first thing. So I'm hoping that is the tone that if it's not adhered to yet, it will be in the coming months. Now, tactically, you talked about protection. And I'm glad this is being recorded, because I think what's going to happen here, I would offer that we need to go back to basics. You have to be responsible for your areas. You have to use common sense. I talked about the most basic concept of time and distance. A private could tell you this. Yeah, we want to keep the enemy far away so we can respond. We want to identify that person. If you fail to prepare, you're preparing to fail. Benjamin Franklin told us that. Coach Wooden, legendary coach UCLA, that's what he told his folks. Steve Jobs, the same thing. He was very much in favor of finding out where things are going, not reacting to it. It's just common sense. So I think we need to be very seriously more robust with our intel. We need to share better, even though we failed to learn those lessons after the Kennedy assassination. And then, of course, during the 9/11, everybody was all bought into this idea. We need to create agencies, DHS, one sandbox. Everybody's going to share information. Well, we're finding that's not the case. The laws are being built in that sandbox. So we need to be more transparent and create more of a team and share information. We just don't do that. So I see that being a tactic. The other one I see is going back to basics and really looking at basic time and space, basic cause and effect, basic physics. We need to figure out who's responsible for what, get out there, walk the site, walk it 3 times, walk it during the day, walk it at midnight, take your counterparts, have meetings periodically to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Sadly, I think this, and again, I'm old school, has caused a little bit of anesthesia here. It's so much easier. Well, I've got the perimeters covered and I've got my folks, there they are. Well, there's no replacement for the human factor. These are wonderful devices, but I think we've lost touch with that gumshoe, get out there, look at the site and feel it, figure it out and really understand it. And those kinds of things you're going to find. The tactics are going to be sort of a evolution of what we know that works with the new technology, but there's no replacement for the human factor, the instinct piece. We have all these fancy things. Why in the world could this happen? So those would be some of the things I think we're going to see. We're going to see more accountability. You're assigned to this. What did you do? Tell it to me. Figure it out. Is this going to work? Let's look at history. When I was assigned advances, my first advance in town, I don't want to bore you too much, but my first assignment in town advance was the Capitol Hilton. The president had not visited there since he'd been shot. Yes, I was sweating. Yeah, big time. I was very concerned. In midnight shift, I'm going through this. I went to the boss. I've got all these things done. What do you think? Whatever. So a lot of things evolved. And the press area was no longer a public area as well. The public had to be pushed back 500 feet. We had covered arrivals. And even then, there were lots of threats. But this is serious as a heart attack. This is not a casual photo op. And so I would see sort of refinement, let's call it that, a refinement of the existing protocols that have been tried and true with an evolutionary component that can address evolving threats. I hope that answers it.
No, thank you very much. It does, and it was a pleasure having you. Under the unfortunate circumstances, we are going to continue these discussions, these conversations throughout this entire process, and maybe even after Election Day, in the lead up to Inauguration Day. Regardless of how the elections turn out, this is an important topic. But I want to thank Larry.
Could I just leave one tiny thing left here? This really cements my commitment and my belief that the public is a very, very valuable asset that's underutilized. They see things, as we saw. They see things, hear things, and notice things that police don't. They know their neighborhoods. They know their areas better than we ever will because they live there. They have good instincts. So I think we really need to pump up the public as a valuable component in the security process and increase everyone's situational awareness.
Thank you, 100%, Martin Johnson. I'm sure we'll talk about that on our next call. 9/11 hijackers. You clearly know precisely what Larry is talking about. But I want to thank everybody. I encourage everybody to, again, visit Gold Institute's website, goldiis.org. Look out for more events and functions both in Washington, in New York, and in California that we are going to start doing more of. And contrary to, a message was sent by the publisher of John's book that it is in fact ready for purchase even today, the updated version. So please, I would recommend everybody go to Amazon.com, go to look for John Wallstetter's book, Presidential Succession. It's by Gold Institute Press, and it is well worth the read. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this Sunday. Looking forward to the next one.